A secondary weapon in Helldivers 2 is essentially a sidearm gun that won't be used as often as your primary weapon, but is still something that can make a critical difference on the battlefield, and ultimately can make the difference between democracy and tyranny. These are guns that can either serve as a backup when you run out of ammo for your primary, but they're also guns that can fill some niche use cases in your loadout, and sometimes these guns can be so useful that they can even outshine your primary weapon. But which of these secondary weapons are the best and which are the worst? Dr. Pooplove here, and today we are going to be ranking the secondary weapons on a tier list, with S being the best and Poop8 being the worst. But not just one tier list, two tier lists, because these guns will be very different depending on whether you are facing off against the Terminids or the automatons. Starting with a P2 Peacemaker, and this is essentially your basic starting pistol, which shoot these semi-auto bullets at a bit of a lower damage. And versus the bugs, I think this kind of just does the bare minimum. I mean, you won't be using this all the time, so that's good, but really it's not going to provide anything outside of the most basic support versus mostly the weaker bugs that you will be facing. But the reality is, in many cases, you might just be better running away and getting some ammo for your primary, and a lot of times it's just a waste of time to use this versus the bugs, as stopping to try to will more likely get you surrounded. I can see it being good when there might be a stray bug around and you just want to take that out without wasting your main weapon's ammo, and certainly when you're running away it will create some dents in some of the bugs, but the mag size feels pretty small, so even if you do end up using it in a pinch, it will only really provide a little bit of extra help. And considering the rest of the guns in this list, I just find it to not be offering much. So for me, this is going to get hold on a second. Before I go any further and rank this, let me say something about these tier lists. These tier lists are not meant to be taken that seriously. I mean, my name is Dr. Pooplove, for crying out loud. You think I'm trying to take this video game that seriously? And look, this may come as a complete shock to some of you, but I'm also not the best player at this game. So I get it. A lot of people are very passionate about the various weapons in this game. And if I classify something way different than what you personally are experiencing with that gun, it definitely can be maddening, but also this is just a video game. So let's just all take a deep breath and relax. I do want this to be somewhat of a useful guide through the guns. And so I do take some feedback on board, but look, this is not a perfect science and it never will be. This is mostly to kind of have engaging, fun discussions about the guns. So let's just, lighten up and have a little bit of fun. Most people know this, but some of you need this disclaimer. Anyways, so the Peacemaker is straight poop. Get flushed. Now, versus the bots, I have similar feelings towards this gun. This gun does have only light armor penetration, which means it can mostly help with just the little bots and the berserkers, although not too much, as you do run out of bullets pretty quickly. And especially when you are panicking versus the berserkers, you might not get one of these guys out in just one mag. Now, one thing I do happen to like with this is you can use this to 2-tap devastators in the head. So if you do have good aim and accuracy, this could become some sort of a dedicated devastator sniper. But really, my views on this weapon have only worsened, as especially with the other secondaries getting buffed, it's hard to really ever want to recommend taking this thing out. For that reason, I am also going to be flushing this down the pooper. But now let's move on to the P19 Redeemer, which is basically an SMG type pistol, and it's a really solid gun for the bugs. It shreds the bugs super fast, especially the hunters and the little guys, and really that just makes this feel pretty nice to have with you. To me, this gun is really the epitome of a backup gun, and that if you are in a pinch, this will have your back, especially as the bugs get close. It's also amazing when on the run, being able to just really quickly take out bugs as they end up getting closer. The main drawback is the lower ammo capacity, but considering that you should mostly be looking at this as a backup, it shouldn't be too bad. All in all, this is very solid, so this will get an A versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, this one is interesting. Although the high recoil will hurt you at range, it does have some solid benefits when the enemies get close. It will shred the little bots very quickly and even berserkers in one mag. And on level 7 or lower, this will get the standard walkers fast by hip firing them. The other thing that's kind of interesting here is, like the Peacemaker, will also basically 2-tap the Devastator heads, which is especially useful if you switch to semi-auto firing here. It kind of makes the Peacemaker seem even worse in that you can just take the Redeemer and modify this if you do want to have some sort of a dedicated Devastator killer. Still though, it's not the best. It's going to be a bit rough versus a lot of things, but it does have some slight upsides, so I will give it a C versus the bots. Now moving on to the P113 Verdict, which is a medium armor semi-auto firing gun, which is otherwise somewhat similar to the Peacemaker, but this time with much more use and a good bit more damage. Now versus the bugs, this can one-shot the little guys, which feels nice, and what I especially love is that versus the bugs, you may often be utilizing a light armor penetrating primary, and so you might not have something as readily available for the medium enemies that you might run into, such as the occasional Hive Guard. And this can be that backup, allowing you to do medium armor penetration when you need to. It feels pretty solid, and I like this as a backup, so I will be giving it a B. Now, versus the bots, this is actually much better now, especially now that it's received some buffs. Being medium armor penetrating means it can now deal damage to nearly every bot without having to go for the weak spots, and the damage level is relatively high per shot, meaning it does do pretty well. What I do love is that this can one-shot Devastators in the heads, and it can even deal with those pesky Striders going for their legs. It's definitely not recommended for the heavier enemies, but at least it can damage a lot of them as well. This feels pretty solid, and so I will be giving it an A versus the bots. Now we have the P4 Senator, which is this very cool revolver type gun where you can do this cool spin move and you can live out your space cowboy fantasies. This has rounds reload plus a speed loader when you have totally emptied out. This will load it up pretty well. Now, previously, I was pretty down on using this versus the bugs, but this has definitely risen in the ranks, especially now that this deals out damage against heavy armor targets. So now this gun has the ability to take out a Bile Titan from the face, as well as a Charger from the face. But I will say, it will take a lot of bullets to do so, but I think this is fair. Now, actually, what's interesting is versus the Chargers, you're probably better off stripping the leg armor off and finishing it off, or just going for the butt with the Senator. Of course, this will also do well versus a lot of the medium bugs, taking most of these guys out in 1 to 2 shots. Now, I think this can be pretty nice to have with you, but it is a little bit less useful versus the bugs, but I still like it as being something you can have dedicated towards the bigger enemies. And especially having this very special heavy armor ability that most guns, even in the primary category, don't have, you have something special here. And it also is great just adding more variety, especially with what support weapons you ultimately end up choosing. So I will be giving this an A versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, this is even better. Given the higher levels of armor over on that front, this ends up getting used quite a bit. This can take Hulks out from the face in a little over 1 mag. This can also take Devastators out in 1 shot to the face. And while yes, it can take out a factory Strider, it's going to take a lot of shots. But what really propels this forward for me is this can deal with the Striders very well. And in fact, you don't even have to go for the legs or any other sort of weak spots at all. You can just shoot it straight in the face. And this saves you in so many ways. I mean, first of all, the worst thing that happens in bot missions is when you die, all of your stuff is like behind enemy lines and really hard to get. And so sometimes you can end up feeling pretty helpless versus the stronger enemies. But now if that happens and you have the Senator on you, you can rely on that to still help get most of these guys. Having this available to you also makes it more viable in my eyes to take out the more strictly anti-tank support weapons, because you can save that anti-tank ammo for the bigger things while using your Senators for things like Hulks, the Striders, and Devastators. And funnily enough, you may even find that your primary is getting underutilized when you have this thing on you. To me, this gets the highest possible S tier versus the bots. This is awesome. Now moving on, we have the P11 Stim pistol. And this one is super interesting, especially because the benefits of this are basically the same regardless of which faction you choose to go against. And so I'm going to be covering them both at the same time. And what's funny here is this is the gun where friendly fire is definitely encouraged because shooting teammates with this essentially gives them a stim to heal up. And I will say this is very useful for team play. Obviously, if you do play solo, this will be pretty useless, but as a team, this can be very helpful. This allows you to pump some health into your teammates at range, allowing them to save up on stims and ultimately stay alive longer. Basically, if you do have this equipped, you just need to pay attention to the UI and your teammates and see their health bars to see who's weak and just shoot them with this. Now, one downside here is that it's not yet very much understood by your teammates what this gun is doing, and so they may see you as trying to kill them. And there do seem to be cases where people get angry and misunderstand. Hopefully, Arrowhead can add some better indicators to make it more clear. Another downside of this is, well, make sure you do have the right gun equipped because I accidentally almost killed a guy thinking I was healing him. But another very useful thing about this gun is it will also give your teammate stamina, even at full health. So especially if you are on the run and you see a teammate slowing down, probably run out of stamina, you can just pump a shot in them and let them continue. Now, I do think there could be some improvements to this. Like, I do kind of wish it was more of a splash shot, as you do have to be very precise with this thing. But regardless, this is the kind of creative addition that I love, which allows for much more of a medical support role to begin to form. As such, I will be giving this an A on both the bug and the bot missions. But let's move on to the SG-22 Bushwhacker, and this is a sidearm shotgun with 3 bullets and the ability to mod it so that you can either fire them off separately or all at once. And this one is solid versus the bugs. It can pack a punch no matter how you decide to mod it, and although I tend to find the single fire mod more useful, I do like that you can use the 3-shot to make quick works of the bigger enemies such as the bile spewers, and then of course switch to the individual shots to take out more of the little guys. Another good thing here about this weapon is the amount of stagger that you have, which can help keep the bugs off you for a bit. This definitely feels like a pretty solid backup, and while the 3-bullet limit to the mag can make reloading this thing kind of annoying, it does serve what I think a secondary basically should, and that is as a solid backup, so I will be giving it an A. Now versus the bots, it's a similar story. It's just not quite as impactful. This definitely packs a punch, and the stagger on this gun is the best part, allowing you to have something to serve up and stun versus especially berserkers and shielded devastators. It's also nice to have something close range as a backup, especially if your primary is more long range. To me though, it just has slightly less usefulness on the bot front, so I will be giving it a B. Okay, now for the P72 Crisper, which is basically a pocket flamethrower, and I found the Crisper to be amazing versus the bugs. We know bugs are weak to the flame, so that's a plus, and it definitely does feel strong versus the bugs, and it even holds its own, feeling almost like a primary. Now it does have a little bit less duration in its canister, and so you can feel like you're running out of flame quickly, but what I love is this can especially be a great thing to deal with the horde, especially if you don't have any other types of flamethrower on you. I also love that you'll be able to use this while running, which gives you a very nice advantage for staying mobile and lighting everything up. This thing is also pretty great for its ability to take out a charger from the front. Now it's not as efficient as the support weapon flamethrower, but it still does the trick. For all this is going to be getting an S tier versus the bugs. This is highly recommended. Now, for the bots, it's not quite as amazing, but it still has some strengths. Sure, it will take the little guys out quickly, applying that damage over time effect to them, but other than them, it does seem to take a little long against everyone else. Now, one plus that is new to this is it can now take a Hulk out from the front. Although that will take a little while, can be nice, especially if you don't have any ways to get around it. This can also take the Striders out pretty well, being one of the few that can, and especially nice that you can just take it out straight from the front. Now, it doesn't feel that strong, like enemies can still take a while to be taken out with this thing, and the limited range means especially it's not going to come in as handy when facing the bots at range, but especially now that this can actually take out a lot of enemies from the front without needing to actually go for any weak spots, this definitely gets some points. And I feel like because this is a secondary, it doesn't really have that pressure that a primary would to be all encompassing. Instead, this fills its niche fairly well, and so I will be giving it a B versus the bots. Next is the GP31 grenade pistol, which, as the name suggests, is a pistol which dishes out grenades. And this is actually pretty amazing. Versus the bugs, it dishes out a lot of splash damage to the horde, which can wipe out a lot of enemies at once. But the damage can also be useful for bigger enemies as well. In particular, the charger takes about 2 shots to the butt, which is very awesome. And the kicker here is the utility, which allows you to close bug holes and can be useful for other objectives as well, like the spore towers and the shrieker nests. One thing that I do love is having this thing allows you to utilize things like the stun grenade as your throwable instead of an explosive, and allow you to still contribute towards the objectives. To me, this is S tier for the bugs, no doubt. And honestly, for much the same reasons, I think this is very good for the bots too. You can close the fabricators. Having this will allow you to take stun bombs and still go for objectives. And stun bombs, I think, come much more in handy versus the bots, by the way. You can also deal splash and stagger to enemies as a bit of an offensive weapon, although I do think it does a little bit worse here than the bugs, especially because the enemies don't clump up as nicely on this front. Still good to have. It's a nice option, and so I will be giving it an A versus the bots. Now for the Laz 7 dagger. And while I have been down on the laser weapons in the past, I can find quite a good number of benefits for this gun. Now, this shoots a laser beam which deals damage to anyone in its path, and that damage is also fire damage, so they will still get a little bit of damage over time. Versus the bugs, this can do really well versus mostly the little guys and the hunters, taking them out very quickly. But I also noticed that it does do decently against bile spewers as well. Otherwise, it does kind of feel like it takes a while for a good number of the medium guys, but it is nice to have unlimited ammo. And one thing I do like is you can be running with this thing and just constantly putting chip and fire damage behind you without needing to worry too much about losing your ammo. It also does pretty well versus the shriekers, and it's very nice in that I often end up wasting a lot of ammo against these flying pests, so having unlimited and being able to take them out quickly is pretty great. This also has the ability to snipe spore towers and shrieker towers, but this will take a while. I can see a solid role for this now. I still don't think it's the best, but I definitely think it has a good place and can be used, so I will be giving it a B versus the bugs. Now versus the bots, I do like this a little bit less, but it does have some benefits. It gets the little guys quick, like really quick, which I really like because you can basically just drag your reticle over these guys and they will almost instantly go down. It also does really well versus the berserkers, and it will take out the devastator heads very quickly, being a decent option for sniping them. The major drawback here is it's only light armor penetrating, which makes it not very effective versus many of the bots. But I can see this as a dedicated little guy killer to help you conserve on medium and heavy weapons elsewhere in your arsenal, so I'll give it some points for that. For me, I think this gets a C versus the bots. Alright, so here's how I rank the secondary weapons versus the bugs, and here's where I rank the secondary weapons versus the bots. But this is just one humble poop's opinion. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and thank you to my YouTube members for supporting me. Stay poopy, and so long, Pooper Troopers.